Welcome to Strategy Battle Games, another GBHL YouTube video. You're here with host GBHL Damian, and this is the second in my videos looking at one of my fantasy armies, one of my old fantasy armies from when I was a kid. So just to recap, this is when I was I got into the kind of hobby about the age 10 and played until I was about 18, 20 initially. So from about 1992 to about 2002, something like that, when I went off to uni. That was my first exploration of the hobby, and I largely played Warhammer Fantasy through that, as well as some of their other games such as Warhammer Quest and Mordheim and Necromunda and that sort of stuff. And I thought while I was back at my parents', I'd show you some of those armies. So in the previous video I showed you my Wood Elves, and I hope you enjoyed that, and some of the kind of ropey paint schemes that I got up to when I was aged about sort of 12 to 14, 15. What I'm now going to do is show you my second main army for fantasy, which was my Vampire Counts. And they were the kind of army that I then got into once I kind of finished my Wood Elves. Once I wanted something else, I really liked the kind of undead idea. It might be that I was a big fan of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It came out in like 1996. I remember watching it on Sky when no one was watching it, and everyone was like, "That sounds ridiculous." So I was a big fan of vampires and vampire movies, and I think I really got drawn towards the Vampire Counts ideal. So I have a bit of Warhammer history for you. Originally, 4th edition Warhammer came out, which is the one that got me into it in about 1993 or 1994, and it was the first edition where they created army books for each army. And this one came out originally, Warhammer Armies Undead, and this was incredibly cool, and it still is incredibly cool to look through it. And this was basically all the kind of undead stuff that's split up at the moment in fantasy between Tomb Kings and undead. Or, well, it was split up, but it's kind of now together again after the end times. So you had things like vampires and mummies and skeletons and zombies and chariots and screaming skull catapults and carrion and everything in the all in the same kind of army list. It was all kind of crazy, but they were a really cool army. And I think this might have been the first army book I ever got. So I had the High Elves and Goblins from the box. And then I remember going into Games Workshop and finding the undead, and at the time you could get loads of undead models for really cheap, because there were these £5 boxes, and normally you got, like, you probably saw my Wood Elf Archers, where you got 8 for a £5. With the skeletons you got 12 skeletons for a £5, or 3 skeleton cavalry for a £5, or a skeleton chariot for a £5. So it was really easy to kind of build up a really cheap army. And I remember doing that, but I didn't really know what I was doing. And what basically used to happen, there's some really cool characters in this, like Nagash. This was the first book that had Nagash in it, and this came out in something like 1994, this book, and Nagash was in it. And then when it was replaced, as we'll talk about, in somewhere around 1999, 5 years later, Nagash then dropped out of the game and only came back in the end times last year. So he was out of the game for about 15 years, which is why everyone was so excited to come back. And the cool thing about this was just some of the way undead worked was so completely different at the time. The difference between them now, as I understand it, isn't quite as big, but they used to just be horrendous to face in the Magic phase and stuff. And there was some really, these are all kind of classic Games Workshop models now. They look a bit, I'm sure many people think these look awful, but at the time, again, like this, I remember Ark and the Black's Chariot. He's now available on like some giant flying demon thing. But I remember that chariot was incredible. And there's some real classic models in it, like Dieter Helsnick on the Manticore, which again looks a bit laughable now, but at the time was awesome. And it was a great book, and it really got me into it. And I really enjoyed the undead. I always liked the undead fluff. And then I got into my Wood Elves, as you saw in the last video, and played with them for a few years. And then, around 1999, this book came out, which was the Vampire Counts. And what they basically did was they took the undead army and they split it into two. So half of it went into Tomb Kings and half of it went into Vampire Counts. And this book came out and it was so cool at the time. It was the first time you had things like bloodlines. It introduced some special characters and introduced a lot of the kind of archetypes of the Warhammer Vampire Counts army that you now kind of take for granted. Things like Banshees, the Black Coach, Direwolves, Fellbats, they were all introduced in this book in 1999. And I absolutely loved it, and I lapped it up, and then this became my second core army. And it was another army that I took to a grand tournament, Warhammer Grand Tournament. And actually, as I was digging through my books, I found this, the Book of the Dead, which is something that I wrote it's a kind of a bunch of fluff in tea-stained paper with blood and stuff. and it was my army list for a Warhammer Grand Tournament, because you used to, at the old-fashioned Grand Tournaments, you used to win prizes for best army list, and so that's my army list at the bottom. This is from a Grand Tournament around 1999, 2000 I think. I haven't got the date in here, but obviously I was quite into it and I used to enjoy doing this sort of thing. So yeah, I got into the Vampire Counts and I really loved them. And something I thought would be quite interesting, I didn't talk about in the last video, is the difference in how GW used to get excited about their stuff. We were talking about this at the weekend at the doubles tournament, sorry, not doubles tournament, the singles tournament at Mansfield. That, you know, everyone knows now GW hate leaks, and they basically announce things on the Monday before, and then you can, with a little viral video, and then you can pre-order them on the Friday and get them the next week. And GW used to make a huge song and dance out of upcoming releases to get you excited, and they've changed their policy on that. But I had this, I'm kind of digging through some old White Dwarfs, and this White Dwarf is from 197. So this is from around 1996, and this was the magazine that launched the Wood Elves. So the Wood Elves that we talked about in the last one. So there's a big kind of lots of articles about them and what their special rules are and all those sorts of things, and trying to get people excited about it. But the previous issue, 196, so long before the Iron Book came, a month before the Iron Book came out, actually released the Dryad models and the Wood Elf Archer models. So before the Iron Book came out, remember this wasn't weekly, these were monthlies. I think there's an article in here. Somewhere, yeah. So there's an article in here about the Dryads being guardians of the forest, and it's got their full rules. It's got the kind of full rules for the Dryads. So before the Wood Elves even had an army book, you could buy the Dryads and use a unit of them in your games to get people kind of excited for it, which I think is a good idea. So I remember getting a few of those and a few of the Archers and going, I don't even know what these are. I don't even know, you know, what book these are coming out in, but they were saying next month there'll be a Wood Elf book. And then we have this, which is issue 195, so the month before that. And inside this, there's not much, but inside the Warhammer news section, you can see a little picture of a Dryad, and there's a little block of text saying that next month, in 2 months' time, the Wood Elf Army book's coming out. So it's not next month. It's not. They can't get any money out of you by doing this. They were just talking. There's a little passage about how good the models are and how cool the rules are and some of the stuff that's coming. And it was just to get people excited. And I really liked that. I really, really enjoyed that aspect of it, that you always kind of had some idea of what was coming up in the future. And I did it for the Vampire Counts as well. So when this first book came out here, there's a little passage in this issue of White Dwarf, which is the month before that came out, where you get where is it? You get a kind of coming soon, and it's got the kind of greens of the zombies and a kind of picture of the vampire and stuff, and then at the back you can there's a pre-order, isn't there? The back of this, yeah, you can pre-order the Vampire Counts army book, and you get a free t-shirt for the first 200 to do that. And it kind of generated excitement. I remember going into my Games Workshop and they had like flyers with some of the pictures of the models of the black coach and things like that, and looking through going, oh, this is really cool. And then they brought out the army book and they had a copy of it, you know, a month, 2 months before it came out for you to flick through. And I always loved that. I always really enjoyed that aspect of GW and the way they got you excited about the products. And you know, for whatever reason, they decided that they weren't doing that anymore, and they've clamped down on that. But it's a part of the company that I miss a bit. But yeah, so the Vampire Counts came out, and I used them for a couple of years, and then relatively soon after this book came out, as I said, this came out in 1999. There was another book which came out in 2001, which was this one, and this one came out because they changed the system of fantasy. So they went from the classic system of percentages, just 25% characters, up to 50% characters, I think it was, and you had to have 25% regiments, and you have 25% monsters. They went from that to the system that they started using in about 2000 for 6th edition fantasy, I think it was, where they had special, core and rare. So then this book came out a couple of years later, and this was largely there were some new models and stuff, but there weren't too many new units for the army or anything. But I was still just about playing at this time, but it was more kind of just making the army fit into the new system, not wholly overriding it. I think there was some new vampires. Zacharias the Ever Living came in on this version, I think, and it killed Melchior, maybe, I think was the fluff. I can't remember. But it's a very, very cool book, and I got very excited, and so I used this with my Vampire Counts army in the 6th edition rules for a while. And then, if you were listening to the other video, you know that I dropped out of the hobby around then and didn't really do anything. But there was this army book, this Vampire Counts army book, that came out in 2008. And I certainly wasn't playing the game at this point. But I still picked up this book because I was interested in Vampire Counts. Same reason I picked up the other Wood Elf book, that I still liked my army. I kind of, as much as I wasn't into the hobby, I kind of tried to just keep an eye on what was going on in the world, and what was going on with my favourite armies and that kind of thing. And I did pick this up, and I even played some games with it, and this introduced things such as, there were some new troops in this. What was new in this? We had ghouls became crypt ghouls for one thing, the corpse cart was new, the blood knights were new, the Vargulf was new, these kind of things. So there was quite a few new troops in there that you'll actually see that I did pick up a corpse card, and it was painted because I wasn't painting anything at this point in my life. I wasn't playing the game, so I just bought one off eBay that was painted, so I could use it in my games. But yeah, and then a couple of years ago, a new Vampire Counts book came out, and I haven't got that one because I'm now into Lord of the Rings and don't play fantasy at all. But that one came out, and with all the Coven Throne and the Mortis engine, or whatever they're called, and those sorts of things. So that's kind of history of the kind of Vampire Counts, which were always my second love. Wood Elves were always my first love, and then my Vampire Counts were also the first army where I felt like, I think I probably started when I started collecting these, like 1999. So I was probably about was it 15? I was probably about 16, 17 when this came out, I guess, and I'd gotten relatively good at painting. So my whole undead army is tied together with the same basing structure in my Vampire Counts army, which my Wood Elf army didn't have. Now these aren't the original undead models I got. They, you know, all the ones for my very first undead army, they were long gone. These were all specifically bought and painted for the Vampire Counts army. But it's tied together by a basing that still now looks a bit archaic, but I was quite proud of at the time. So every now and again, me and my mates dig out my Wood Elves and my Vampire Counts. We have a couple of games of 6th edition fantasy, and we have a great laugh with it. But yeah, so that's a bit of history about the Vampire Counts. I hope you found that mildly interesting. And what I'm now going to do is show you my Vampire Counts armies. Okay, so this is my Vampire Counts army. Again, just a reminder, this is for kind of 5th and 6th edition fantasy, this army worked. And it's this shelf here and this shelf down here. And all told, it was about 3,000 points in those old tabs. So let's get stuck in. First up, we've got the ghouls. These are the really classic ghouls. The first ghouls for the Undead Army book. You notice this, my basing here. Looking at it now, it looks horrendous, but it's really it's a massive step up from the Wood Elves you would have seen in the previous video. And what it basically is the rocks. If any of you have seen my hobby vlogs now, you'll notice that all my bases have small rocks on them as well as the stand, and this is the small rocks. So this is what GW used to sell, and I used to just glue down those rocks onto it, paint them, and then glue static grass on top. And now obviously those rocks have become the kind of feature bits of my other bases. But these are these are models from the earliest kind of undead army book releases, and so they look a bit ropey, and they're very high fantasy and all that. But I never got any of the later ghouls, so I used to use these as a little skirmishing unit. You can see right along there. This is the corpse cart that I'm not going to look too much at, because this is the thing that I think I told you I bought on eBay, so I didn't paint this. But it kind of fits in with my army. But I don't think I've even ever used it in a game, as it turns out. But I bought that just so that I could try that out in a game, and never kind of got around to it. These are my fell bats, ones that I painted. To use a few of these. So this is all painted after the Wood Elf army that you would have seen. If you haven't seen that, you might want to check out that video first, because it's these are earlier models. So my painting on everything on my Vampire Counts should be better. And you notice I have kind of 4 of these, and I've also got some more at the back. And these are the different models. These were then released later, and again these were bought off eBay painted. You can see these are different models, and this was because I thought I might want some more at some point, I think, and I wasn't painting at this point. So by the time that army book came out, I was out of the hobby, but I still enjoyed playing the game. I just didn't paint at all. I didn't have any paint set up anywhere. So I bought some painted so that I could use them, but as it is, I don't think I've ever used them in a game. Along the front, we have the Black Knights, which used to be, they've got some cool new models now, but I remember when these came out, they were just amazing. These were whites. So this was the Vampire Counts army book. Originally you just had skeletons on horses, but when the Vampire Counts book came out, you got whites, and these are really cool models. So they were the classic kind of skeleton steed with the metal white on top. They're very, very cool, and you see the bases are the same. So you'll see that even if you think they're a bit ropey, the bases in all this army are consistent and kind of tie them together quite nicely. So we've got those. Got a few kind of character models down the front. We have the Red Duke, as he was called, who was a mounted vampire released for a Warhammer campaign. That was a very cool model. He used to be my vampire lord. You see I tried a few bits out. There's a beheaded Empire soldier and some entrails, I think that is, in there if you have a look. On there, I was trying to do some kind of fancy basing stuff with this guy. So he used to be my leader when I had him on a horse. He used to be my general. I've also then got another White King here, who was another metal hero, and this guy was taken to a tournament. I don't know if you remember from the Wood Elf video, but in GW tournaments you had to show every special, every magic item you put on him. So this guy had a thing at the time that was called the Chalice of Blood, I think it was, that restricted shooting attacks. So I had to convert him to be holding a chalice. And this chalice, you might want to have a little look at it, and any kind of people who've been into this hobby for a long time might know where it's from. It's actually from a Space Marine, believe it or not. There's a Blood Angel Space Marine, something like Brother Capula or Corpula or something like that, I think his name was. And that's a Space Marine's hand. But it actually works very well as a White's hand. So I converted that, so he was holding that. And his horse had barding, and he had a lance on the back, put on the back. I think that was a Chaos Warrior's sword he had put on. But you have to show everything. And so we had him. We also had this Standardbearer, and something I started doing for my Vampire Counts army tour was making Standardbearers that didn't have banners. They would have totems. So the Standardbearer, the standard is what you bought, but obviously you're going to put a flag on it, and I tied this Empire garland to it. And you notice he's wearing pink and yellow livery, and that was the, I can't remember now, is it Aveland or something? One of the Empire provinces. And I was going to do a Empire army in those colours. I just never got around to it. I got out of the hobby. But you'll see a few casualties dotted around this army that they're all in those colours, as if this army's kind of just slaughtered that one. But I was quite pleased with this kind of guy hanging on there as a standard bearer. I was quite fond of him. Slide him into there. Then at the back we've got the ranks of the normal troops. These were the Grave Guard, which were the whites on foot. And GW used to do these undead shields where you got a black shield and then you got different things to glue onto them. So one of them was a kind of crossed bone, so I put that on. All my Grave Guard will have that on them. If I just remove the corpse cut, should be able to see there the kind of ranked up thing on them. And these guys, I remember I got these at a grand tournament at Warhammer World, where you went to the tournament and at them they had these guys on sale, and they came out something like 6 months later. This is the sort of thing GW used to do at their events. We're like, well, while you're here, these aren't going to be released for a few months. And I remember buying the entire regiment there and then coming home, and there was no internet back then in the way there is now, and everyone was like, what the hell are these? And I was like, it's my new unit of Graveguard. These haven't been released. I know, and that used to be one of the awesome things about GW. It was always worth going to things like Games Day and the tournaments, because you always got pre-release models and that sort of stuff. So I hit the jackpot with these guys. Next up is my rank and file skeletons. You can see the guys with the hand weapons all have... Is it different? Oh, he's a broken spear, that's why. The guys with the hand weapons have got skulls on their shields, and the guys with the spears should have skulls with crossbones on their shields. Yeah, and these were the classic fantasy skeleton models, the ones that I talked about at the start that used to be able to get 12 of for a £5, which are incredible because they were multi-part. And I know that seems unremarkable now, but at the time it was amazing. So you got the whole body and the legs, and the arms were separate and the heads were separate. So you could arrange them in just infinite numbers of poses. You also got these breastplates, which were an option, and the arms for axes and swords or spears. And I remember having to find loads of these breastplates to put on one of the units, at least you'll see, because that unit had light armour and you had to model that on. So again, this is from exactly the same skeleton kit, and you can see his pose is completely different. And I loved these models. I used to absolutely love these guys. They're so simple but so effective. I just had like kind of loads and loads of them. And you see there, we get the Standardbearer out. This is another one of those Standardbearers. So you see he's got the pink and yellow Empire dead guy again, hanging by his neck this time. Put a bat on there and dead arm apparently. And a head, so that was all converted. That was all built from scratch by me. That's a brass rod. That isn't an original standard. I've converted that. You also in there have got a absolute Warhammer classic model of a drummer that came out for the very first Undead book, but I thought it was kind of cool. This was around the same time as these Ghouls came out, but I thought this was still cool enough to be used in my army. There's also a mix of some of the newer skeletons. So if I grab this guy, this was when they released a skeleton regiment a bit later, where it wasn't as big a deal for Undead because they already had the multi-part models, but it was when around maybe 98, was it 90, 99, something like that, GW started their posable plastic kits. They started with Chaos Warriors, and then they started with the Empire guys, and eventually Skeletons got one. And it was a huge deal back then that you could you didn't just have those single pose models like the Wood Elves I showed you before, but you could mix poses. And you can see that they kind of became a bit bigger than the existing ones, but they still fit in quite nicely together. So those two units in there, of the spearmen and the hand weapons, are a kind of mix of both of those both of those regiments of skeletons. So there you go, that's a lot of the infantry, a lot of the rank and file of my guys. Also notice that one, that banner bearer's got a kind of beastman, a dead beastman on the top of the banner. So there we go. Let's go down here and have a look at some characters. So we have, let's start with this guy. This vampire is from Blood Bowl. This is actually the vampire character from Blood Bowl. And I really like the model, so I converted him to have a sword. He used to have a pommel on that sword, but it's obviously broken off at some point. And you'll notice a lot of I was painting them slightly differently, that I wanted my vampires to have kind of blue shading. So a lot of the vampire skin is kind of is very, very pale blue or white. I was pretty pleased. You can see they're painted better than my Wood Elves. We also then have a Wraith, which were awesome models in the game. These kind of went from being units to being heroes to being units again, I think. He's got a book on here that's been a conversion because that's the cursed book that I think was like -1 to leadership test or something. And he caused terror, which meant every unit that wanted to charge his unit had to take a terror test, and they did that with a -1 modifier because of the book. So I took him to the tournament, so I had to model the book onto him. But I'm pretty pleased with this. It's kind of cool model. This is a Blood Dragon vampire who was released for the first Vampire Counts army book. Again, you can hopefully see that I think he's relatively well painted this day. There's little, not sure how well it's going to play, but you can hopefully see there's a little bit of blood on his teeth where he's bitten someone. These were the idea of warrior vampires came around with that first Vampire Counts army book. You had the Blood Dragons, the Von Carsteins, the Necrocs, and the Lamines, who are all different in different kinds of ways. We have a Necromancer, which is very important to any kind of undead army. I think he was painted pretty well. It's kind of cool. Cool little model. We have the classic Warhammer Vampire. This is the one from the first Undead Army book, when you couldn't have vampire counts, but you could have vampires in your undead army. And I released this model, which was just awesome. Really, really cool model. So he was painted up. I used to use him as a Von Carstein vampire because he was in that kind of traditional style. Again, face very extreme highlighting, but I think it's quite effective. We then have a White King whose memory serves has lost an arm. Yeah, he does. This is a white model that I used to use. He used to have an arm with a shield, spear on it, but God only knows where that's gone. Some time over the year. He used to be like a champion for my skeletons. Absolute classic Games Workshop model. Vlad Von Carstein, the original. Isabella isn't here. I had her somewhere. I'm not sure if I've still got her. But that was Vlad, who was an incredible one. He had the cast iron ring, the in the old, vampires were incredibly hard to kill, Vampire lords were nigh on impossible to kill, and the cast iron ring back in the day would just bring Vlad back on full health. It was amazing, and he was terrifying to play against, absolutely terrifying. Very, very cool though, and loved the fluff. I was very, very pleased in the end times when they brought him back to life. Another White King I used to use as a champion. It's kind of cool. As you can see, like, these models probably aren't as good as the stuff I paint now, but they're not embarrassing now. I'm probably painting these around 16, 17, 18, something like that. And they're a bit better. The bases, I remember being very happy with the bases at the time. They obviously look a bit ropey now. So yeah, that's a big selection of kind of my vampire characters going along there. Come on. What's your problem? Oh, there we go. Having some issues somewhere. Those are the various guys that led my armies over the years. We also have this guy. I don't think he's in it anymore. I think they removed this as a piece of fluff, but when they first made the Vampire Counts book, they invented a creature called a winged nightmare. And the idea was that the nightmare was like a Frankenstein's monster of different monsters. And they released a model for it with a vampire on it. And the model really disappointed me because it just looked like a new monster. It just looked like a bit of a small dragon kind of thing. And it wasn't what the fluff was about at all. The fluff was meant to be that it was stitched together from lots of different monsters. So that's what I did. I wanted an unridden one for my army. And I basically just raided my bits box and tore apart some old monsters I wasn't using. So the head is the top of the head is Azog the Slaughterer, I think his name was. He was an Orc warlord. It was his wyvern. I did that and I snapped some of the horns off. The left arm is the left arm from the Beast Lord Rakarth's dragon, the Dark Elf dragon. One of these wings is a Manticore wing from Dieter Helsnicht. The other wing and the body, I think, are actually the Winged Nightmare. I think the body, right arm and right leg and that wing are the actual Winged Nightmare kit. That one's a Manticore wing from Dieter Helsnicht. That's the Manticore tail from Dieter Helsnicht. This leg, I think, is from a demonette or something, a Slaanesh demonette steed. And then this giant foot over here was from a plastic dragon that I had for some reason. And it obviously looks utterly balmy, but it looked exactly like the sort of thing that they were describing in the book. So I was really, really happy with it. And this new gribbly, filthy creature just used to fly around like slaughtering enemy war machines and that sort of thing. So it was a lot of fun. So it was a lot of fun to kind of convert and build. Utterly absurd. Damn thing couldn't stand up if it was in real life. It's like Barbie. So we'll pop them back there. And we also here have a regiment of zombies. Again with the totems hanging off the Standardbearer. These guys are plastic. Now, these guys, I know when the last Vampire Counts came out, everyone was like, oh god, I can't believe there's new zombies. The old zombies are so rubbish and awful models, and it's these ones, it's the plastic regiment kit that you can still get. But I remember these coming out, and everyone loved them. Everyone thought they were amazing when they first came out. It just, again, shows how things have changed over years. These were the original metal zombies that first came out for the Undead Army book. Absolutely awful troop zombies, but if you got them in enough numbers, they were nigh on unstoppable. You had all these unique poses of metal. There was about, I think there were like 20 different zombie poses, really kind of cool models. Long since out of production. And then they were replaced with this plastic kit that you can still buy to this day. That allowed you to do kind of cool things like this. Have him driving that around. I think he's wielding a foot, which is a great weapon. It's kind of cool. This guy I enjoyed. Lifting his own head off. You can see the teenage Damian was somewhat unhinged. So none of these were poses that they suggested. You just kit bash it to your heart's content. This guy's fun. He'd hit you with his own leg. And I had, what else is there? This guy, that kind of guy coming out of the grave and that sort of stuff. So the zombies were cool, and they were good in the game as well. I've also got these two, which I'll show you. One of the first things that came out with the Vampire Counts army book was a Spirit Host, and you might well have seen the new Spirit Host armies, Spirit Host models that a lot of SPG players want to use as shades, and the old Spirit Host models were terrible, absolutely terrible. It's been in production for 15 years somehow, and it was just horrendous. It was this almost like the same ghost going woo. It's a horrible model. And I didn't like that at all, and you were meant to put them on a square base. So what I did was basically just use a combination of the zombie kit and some of the Empire kits. So you can see this guy's got like Empire legs and an Empire head with a zombie body. And I kind of kit bashed them to make these kind of spirit hosts. And I made 2 bases of these guys. I think that guy's got a skeleton body there. Some Empire legs again. Empire of the Humans, for anyone who doesn't know. And I really like these. I was quite pleased with these as kind of conversions. So as you can see, by this point there was a lot of kind of converting work going on for me. I got these bat swarms, which I'm going to stand up to show you, so I can put them together. Let's grab these. So I think these look kind of cool. And the bat swarms were these little tiny metal bats that came on stands. They came on little, not the clear flying stands, but they came on little black rods. And basically what that meant was you had 5 rods sticking out of the ground. And it just looked a bit rubbish, I thought. So for the same reason I kind of put my Hobbit eagles in trees, because I don't want to see the flying stands, I didn't really want to see the metal rods. So what I did was kind of build this graveyard. So I built this little fence out of balsa wood, put loads of gravestones in it. And then there's bits around the back, like, I think that one, isn't he? There's a kind of head, and he's kind of pulling the entrails out of it. This guy's up on this little pole coming off the skull. So it all looks just a little bit more natural. There's a wheel around the back of that one. The idea was just to make it look a bit cooler. That one's just got some lichen hiding the stand. It's a bit more of a cheat. But yeah, I was quite pleased with how they came out. And then they, as you can see, the kind of fence goes back, goes along the back, and then curves out. It was meant to be kind of the inside of a graveyard. I was very chuffed with that at the time. So yeah, we had some bat swarms. On a similar vein, we also had some dire wolves, and dire wolves were meant to be undead wolves. And the models came out and they were just wolves, and I was really disappointed. They were just plastic wolves. So what I did was I got some skeleton horses, and I decided to kit bash them. And so I got these things that were half wolf and half skeleton. So these are all conversions. You could buy the plastic wolves and you could buy the skeleton horses. And I just used it, and I just gave like a tail here or a leg there, or half the body, or whatever. And I was really chuffed with these. And I remember taking these to a grand tournament, and they attracted quite a lot of attention from. I remember Paul Sawyer, that fat bloke, the editor, coming over and having a look at these and going, "Oh, you're the guy with the wolves." So they were talking about them, and little 17-year-old me was like, "Oh my god, you're a celebrity!" And I was very excited by that. So I got. I was quite pleased, because by this point I think I was very pleased with where my hobbying was for my age. I liked my kind of painting, and I liked what I was doing conversions wise, and that sort of thing. So yeah, I ended up having about 16 of those like that, because in the first edition of the rules they were awesome. This guy as well was a Doom Wolf. It was the champion. That's another conversion. This was the head was some sort of Chaos Hound or something, I can't remember, but the Doom Wolf again just looked a bit boring, so I think it was the Doom Wolf body with this kind of Chaos Hound head that I put onto it, which is kind of cool. At the back is one of my favourite GW models of all time, which is the original Zombie Dragon. This guy is so cool. Just get rid of this. You can see him properly. This is such an awesome model. I'm going to take this guy off. This is the Red Duke again. That was the first version. I bought him when he first came out, painted him for my old undead army, and then painted a new one here for my new undead for this kind of Vampire Counts army. But I kept this guy and would use him as a vampire if I wanted him riding the Zombie Dragon. But again, you used to be able to have a Zombie Dragon unridden, and this model is just so cool. I mean, I like the Zechariah, the ever-living Zombie Dragon was great. I don't particularly like the new Zombie Dragon, the plastic one. I don't think they've ever made a better one than this, to be honest. But this metal Zombie Dragon was just awesome. And I put it on this kind of fairly elaborate base with lots of slate and stone and stuff. I just used to love it. It wasn't all that great in the game, but so cool. And I was very happy with the paint job I gave it at the time. This kind of rotting dragon. It was absolutely brilliant, and I really, really love it. So very chuffed with that. Stick is right up back on. And the final thing to show from Vampire Counts is probably my favourite thing, the thing that was absolutely archetypal about Vampire Counts armies. Ta-da! The Black Coach, which again wasn't around for the Undead Army book. It only came about when they turned it into Vampire Counts. and it was one of the coolest models I ever saw when it came out. And it was, I remember this being in the flyer in the Games Workshop going, this is why you want to get excited about Vampire Counts. And this model was obscenely good in the game. In the first edition of the rules, it was incredible. It was kind of like, it powered up like Bolg does in SPG now, but it just became absolutely unstoppable. By the time it had got 15 kills or something, it could fly. I remember it was a chariot that could fly, which is just, you could just pick it up and move it like 24 inches around the board. It was just incredible. So again, like all the old chariots in Warhammer Fantasy, you could kill the horses, so the horses had to be removable. And he says they should come out. Yep, so they were removable. But one of the great things about it, that's how you stop chariots in fantasy. You shot at them and you killed the horses. One of the great things about the Black Coach was, as it powered up, it could move without the horses. So that was cool. And you had a wraith driving it. You can see again, one of those poor guys from Aveland, if it is, has been beheaded by the wraith. His head's down there. He's just taken his head off there. You've had the kind of broken sword down here. That's obviously been the same swipe as taking out his sword as well. And there's one guy even more unfortunate over here who's been run over by the coach, again in the same livery. So it's a shame I never got that Empire Army painted, because I think it would have been quite cool. But I remember doing him with a nail file, just lying him on the ground and just, not a nail file, a needle file, just kind of sawing into his body to make this kind of groove, then putting in some kind of green stuffed entrails as they came out. I was all into that sort of stuff. And one of the coolest things about the Black Coach, if you've ever seen it, is that inside there is a coffin, like that. And inside the coffin is the vampire that powered it. So it was his life spirit that would power this coach. And he lied in there. That's kind of cool. There's no need for that to be in there whatsoever. You're never going to see it. But you always knew it was in there. It was good fun to kind of paint that up. And I absolutely adored this model. And this kind of, that archetype, the Von Carstein vampires and the kind of, you know, classic Bram Stoker Dracula kind of approach was what I really, really loved. The real gothic feeling of the Vampire Counts. And I loved this model. Really, really loved it. And I was a big fan of the Von Carstein vampires. So there we go. That is my Vampire Counts army, which was my kind of second love. It was the second big army for fantasy I built up. I had loads of other stuff over the years, things like bits of high elves and bits of orcs and bits of lizardmen, the kind of stuff that came in the starter boxes. But it was always Vampire Counts and wood elves that really kind of piqued my interest, as it were. And that's where I kind of spent all my a lot of my teenage years painting up these armies. So yeah, there we go. I hope you've enjoyed this video, this second kind of look at some of my old fantasy stuff. I've got more kind of around the place, more bits and bobs of GW history and other kind of things. So if there would be an interest in seeing videos like that, let me know. And maybe next time, folks, I'll do something about a Necromunda gang or Mordheim models, or I don't know, anything else I can dig out. But yeah, until then, I hope you've enjoyed this. As ever, don't forget to comment, like, share and subscribe. Follow us on Facebook and like us on Twitter, but it's the other way around. Support your Hobbit hobby and happy strategy battle gaming.